Continuing our discussion of the Tarquir Dragontorm precons, this video is going to be focusing on the Abzan Armor precon, featuring Felithar the Steadfast as the face commander, and Baator Ancestor's Voice as the alternate commander. Felithar is 1 in Abzan colors for a 0/5, with each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Creatures you control can attack as though they do not have defender, and we can pay 3 mana and tap it, sacrifice another creature, draw cards equal to that sacrificed creature's toughness, and then discard cards equal to its power. Looking at Baator, it is 2 in Abzan for a 3/5 flying lifelinker, with, at the beginning of your end step, put a number of +1/+1 counters on up to 1 other target creature that you control, equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. Then, return up to 1 target creature card with mana value less than or equal to the amount of life you lost this turn from your graveyard to the battlefield. For this video, we're going to be focusing on Felithar in the command zone. While Baator is a great choice for the 99, he wants more of a life loss, life gain synergy, where the precon mostly comes with a lot of defender or big butts, low power creatures that we want to focus on. And so now, before we get into the cards from the deck, let's go over the game plan so you have a better idea of how these cards work with the deck. What a Felithar deck really wants is very low mana creatures that have very large toughness. Getting something out like a 2 or a 1 mana 0/4 that once we get Felithar out turns into a 4/4 that we can swing in early is major value that we love to see in this deck. And from our playtesting with this deck, you can actually play it extremely aggro. With the right amount of ramp and lucky card draw, you can actually on turn 5 or 6 get like 30 or more toughness on the board that can be turned into power that we can start swinging in to dwindle people down. And Felithar's last ability, letting us sack one of our creatures and draw cards equal to its toughness and then discard equal to its power, is actually extremely useful in a pinch whenever someone wants to take out our 13/0 creature because it's going to turn into a 13/13 on combat. While I wouldn't recommend going totally aggro with this deck, it's very good at being versatile in any situation. All of a sudden, our 4 mana 2/10s turn into 10/10s on combat, where people don't want to swing into us because we can easily kill all of their creatures, but they also don't want to leave themselves open where we can just get 10 damage in with 1 creature. And so now that we know the main focus of this deck, let's get into the cards that came with it. Let's start with the unique cards to this precon. Tarquir Dragontorm is 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 flying dragon with ward 2, with at the beginning of your upkeep, put a number of +1/+1 counters onto each other creature you control equal to that creature's toughness. And now, I really don't think I need to explain to you why this matters in a Toughness Matters deck. I mean, for example, we get it out, our next upkeep we have our commander Felithar out, we put 5 +1/+1 counters on it, making it effectively a 10/10 in combat, and then if we're lucky enough to make it to our next turn, on that upkeep it's going to get 10 more +1/+1 counters, making our commander basically a 20/20 in combat. Tarquir Dragontorm is a fantastic new card for this deck, and I'm really glad that it was included. Moving on to our next new card for this deck is Rampant Architect, which is 3 and a green for a 3/4 Elephant Advisor, with whenever this creature enters or attacks, create a 1/3 white wall creature token with Defender. Then, whenever a creature you control with Defender dies, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Rampant Architect is a very good all-around card for this deck. With its ability off of entering and swinging, making a 1/3 wall that's going to turn into a 3/3 in combat is just really good value that I like seeing in this deck. And with that text alone, it would already be a fantastic card for Felithar, but also with our defenders dying off of either a board wipe, removal, or even Felithar's own ability, we get to ramp ourselves off of it is just extremely good value that I love seeing in this deck. Arbor Adherent is the next card new to this deck, which is 3 and a green for a 2/4, with tap to add 1 mana of any color, or we can tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is the greatest toughness among other creatures we control. So with Arbor Adherent and Felithar on the battlefield, we could tap Arbor Adherent for 5 mana of any one color, since our commander's toughness is 5. And then once we get into the late game and have other bigger toughness creatures, the mana that we can get off of this card is insane. The next card new to this deck is Will of the Abzan. For a 3 and a black sorcery, we can choose one, or if we can choose our commander, we can choose both as we cast a spell. The first option is any number of target opponents, each sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among creatures that they control, and they also lose 3 life. The next option is that we can return target creature card from our graveyard directly to the battlefield. With our commander out, being able to do both is insane value for us. The top option, making all of our opponents lose 3 life and sack their biggest creature, is very good for if we want to swing out with our 0-10 or 0-13 creatures for some lethal damage. And also being able to get one of our creature cards that either got removed or got sacked off of Felothar's bottom ability is also extremely good value to have another attacker or another draw trigger off of Felothar. The next new card is Jaws of Death, 3 and a black for 8 enchantment that says that whenever a creature we control enters, target opponent loses life equal to the difference between that creature's power and that creature's toughness. So if we get this out before our commander, target opponent would lose 5 life since our commander is a 0-5. And I'm sure that you can see from there how this can get out of hand whenever we start casting our 0-13 or our 2-10 creatures. I really like this as a unique Impact Tremors effect for our deck. While Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to every opponent whenever a creature enters, this one we're normally going to be targeting 1 opponent down with our very large toughness, low power creatures and just taking life off in big chunks whenever we cast our defenders. Tip the Scales is 2 and a black sorcery with sacrifice a creature. Whenever you do, all creatures get -X/-X until the end of turn, where X is the sacrifice creature's toughness. For our deck, this is really good. We can sack one of our 1/3 walls and wipe all of our opponent's tokens out or all of their smaller creatures, and most of our very large toughness creatures are going to stay alive, making this in a good scenario a one-sided board wipe. And now for my favorite new card from this precon is Reunion of the House. 5 and 2 white for a sorcery, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then we exile Reunion of the House. This is the perfect card that we want for this deck in the late game. Whether there was a board wipe that wiped out our whole board, or whether we just, over time, have a lot of creatures from Felothar's bottom ability in our graveyard, with Reunion of the House, we can get back probably every creature in our graveyard, since more likely than not, they're not going to add up to 10 or more power. This is the perfect board rebuilder, and I'm really glad that they printed it in this deck. And now that we've gone over some of the unique cards from this precon, let's go over some of the great reprints that came with it. The 3 most notable reprints from this precon are Seaborn Muse, Staff of Completion, and Dragonlord Dracoma. Starting with Seaborn Muse, this card has actually recently become a game changer. For 3 and 2 green for a 2/4 spirit, we get to untap all permanents that we control during each other player's untap step. And now it's pretty clear to see why this card would be considered and put onto the Game Changers list, letting us, for this deck in specific, untap with all of our huge creatures from combat and have them back for blockers as well. It also allows us to not have to worry about keeping mana open for things like removal, and also synergizes really well with our commander, letting us activate its ability every single turn if we wanted to, since we get to untap it. Seaborn Muse is such a powerful card, and I'm actually really glad that they added it to this precon for the value that we get with our creatures, and specifically our commander. Moving on to the next reprint is Staff of Completion. For 3 mana, we get this very nice value artifact where we can pay various amounts of lives to get different abilities. And while this card is really good if we have Baitor out, since for this video we're focusing on Felothar as our commander, I'm not going to talk about it that much, but just know if you do want to take this deck in a life gain theme, this is a very good card to keep in it. And now for the last good reprint I want to talk about is Dragonlord Dracoma. For 4, a green and a white, we get a 5/7 flying lifelinker that cannot be countered. It also has the ability that our opponents cannot cast spells during our turn. This is a very good piece to have in the late game, making sure our very good splashy plays for the win can't be countered or interacted with, which can lead to our wins being a little bit easier to pull off. Having the extra benefit of having the keywords flying and lifelink to help us get through for damage and keep our life total up, this is a perfect card to have for our deck. So now that we've gone over the main game plan and the cards that come with the precon, let's go over some of the cards that we can put in to help up the power level of this deck if that's what you're looking for. And let's start with the cards in set from Tarquir Dragonstorm that maybe you'll pull from some packs or pick up from your local game store that can really help us bump this deck up a notch. Starting with 2 great enchantments from the set, Hollowmurk and Baronstep Siege. Hollowmurk is just Golgari to cast for an enchantment that whenever it enters, we choose Sultai or Abzan. For Sultai, whenever a counter is put onto one of our creatures, we get to draw the card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Or for Abzan, whenever we attack, we can put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains menace until the end of turn. Now normally in this deck we're going to be choosing Abzan to help boost up our creatures and giving them a little bit of evasion with menace, which, while not the most powerful ability, for 2 mana to get this out early is really good for our deck. Moving on to Baron Step Siege for 2 in Orzhov. As this enters, we can choose Abzan or Mardu. For Abzan, at the beginning of our end step, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that we control, or for Mardu, at the beginning of our end step, if a creature died under our control this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. And now, unlike the last Siege, I actually see both of these options being viable in a Felithar deck. With one option, having a big board of very giant creatures that we get to put a +1/+1 counter on our end step is very nice, but at the same time, if we're planning on sacrificing one of our defenders with Felithar's ability, the Mardu option will make it so all of our opponents have to sacrifice one of their creatures, hopefully making them sack one of their value engines or one of their big creatures that they were going to swing in for damage on us. And now for the next card from the set is Host of the Hereafter. For 2 in Golgari, we get a 2/2 zombie warlock with this creature enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And then it has whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put its counters on up to 1 other target creature that you control. This is really good since our deck has kind of a +1/+1 counter sub-theme. One of the main weaknesses of counters-based decks is that once your creature dies, all of the value that you putting those counters onto it goes away as it dies. Host of the Hereafter is a good way of making sure that weakness doesn't always affect us. Whether we need to sacrifice one of our big creatures that has +1/+1 counters on it with Felithar, or they just die naturally through the course of the game, Host of the Hereafter is a great creature that we can put into this deck to make sure we don't lose value with our +1/+1 counters. And now for the next card from Inset is Baitor Kin to All. For 2 in Abzan, we get a 5/7 flyer, with at the beginning of our end step, if creatures we control have toughness 10 or greater, we get to draw a card. Then, if creatures we control have total toughness 20 or greater, we get to untap each creature that we control. And then finally, if creatures we control have total toughness 40 or greater, each opponent loses half of their life rounded up. And now while the 40 or toughness ability is really flashy, we're mostly going to be using this for the card draw and for the untapping of all of our creatures. With Baitor out, just one other creature in our deck is really going to put us over that 10 toughness mark, and if we have a decent board state, we're probably going to be hitting the 20. If we're able to get to 40, that is wonderful, but I would really bank on this being a really good card draw and untapping effect for our deck, with the 40 or more life clause being an extra little win more effect that can go nicely in some games. And now for the final card in set that I want to talk about for upgrades for this deck is Synchronized Charge. For a 1 and a green sorcery, we get to distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures that we control. Creatures that we control with counters on them gain Vigilance and Trample until the end of turn. And then it has Harmonize 4 and a green, which just means that we can cast this card from our graveyard for its Harmonize cost, and we can tap creatures that we control to help reduce that cost by X, where X is that creature's power. Synchronized Charge is the perfect low mana overrun spell that we need for this deck. It helps with our +1/+1 counter themes by letting us put those counters onto our creatures, and also gives them 2 valuable keywords until the end of turn in Vigilance and Trample, letting us not only hit through blockers, but also have all of our attacking creatures able to stay back as blockers for ourselves. So now that I've gone over a few of the cards from in-set that I've liked for this deck, let's go over some generic value upgrades from all of Magic that we can throw in. And starting with one of the most iconic Defender cards, Tree of Perdition. For 3 and a black, we get a 0/13 Defender, where we can tap it to exchange target opponent's life total with this creature's toughness. Normally with Tree of Perdition, you want to get it out early so you can exchange someone's life total from 30 down to 13, and you have a 0/30 blocker. But for this deck, it's even more valuable. From our last example, if we're able to swap Tree of Perdition's toughness with someone's life total being 30 to 13, not only is their life total reduced to 13, but we now have a 30/30 attacker off of Felithar. Tree of Perdition is such an iconic Defender card in Magic the Gathering, and it would be a disservice if I didn't mention it as upgrades for this deck. And now the next card for upgrades is McCready Lamplight Mayor. For Orzhov, we get a 1/3, with whenever a creature we control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Sulk until the end of turn. Sulk being, it cannot be blocked by creatures with greater power. And then whenever a creature with power 4 or greater attacks us, its controller loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. For only 2 mana, this card helps us on so many levels on offense and defense. Starting with on attack, most of our creatures are going to have power 2 or less, so giving them Sulk makes them almost unblockable unless our opponents have tokens or value creatures that they're willing to sacrifice going to blocks. And then the little bit of drain effect and life gain that we get off people swinging at us is really good protection that actually makes people not want to swing at us more often than you would think. For only 2 mana, this card is just so valuable, and I would really recommend putting it into your Felithar deck. And now for the next fantastic card that we can use to upgrade is Luminous Broodmoth. For 2 and 2 white, we get a 3/4 flyer with whenever a creature that we control without flying dies, we can return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. And now this is a fantastic card to go into our Felithar deck. Not only would it make our creatures dying in combat or from blocking be able to come back with flying, but off of Felithar's own ability, we no longer have to have the clause of sacrificing that creature really. We can now pay 3 and sack one of our giant creatures with Felithar and have it return to the battlefield with a flying counter on it, getting the card draw effect without losing the creature. And now for a fun little card that you can add to your Felithar deck is Shield Sphere. For 0 mana, we get a artifact creature wall with Defender that is a 0/6, with whenever Shield Sphere blocks, we put a -0/-1 counter on it. At its very worst in this deck, Shield Sphere is a 0 mana 6/6 that we can start swinging at people for lethal damage as soon as we get Felithar out. But even the -0/-1 counters on it is kind of negated with this deck whenever it's running smoothly with all of our +1/+1 counter synergies on it, making this card a perfect 0 drop for our Felithar deck. And now for a finisher card that goes perfectly with this deck is Last March of the Ents. For 6 and 2 green, we get a sorcery that cannot be countered, where we draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures that we control, and then put any number of creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield. So with this card in a Felithar deck, we can probably expect to draw between 7 to 13 cards off of this effect, and then put all creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield. From there, we just need something like Jaws of Death out, and we can probably go lethal on most players. Last March of the Ents is the perfect game ender for this deck, and I would highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. And now the next card to really power up this deck is Unnatural Growth. For 1 and 4 green, we get an enchantment where at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature that we control until the end of turn. This card is the perfect sword and shield for this deck, not only being able to double the damage that we can do to players off of attacking, but also making attacking us even more threatening, doubling our creature's power and toughness off of our opponent's combats as well. And now for the final card I would recommend for upgrades is Angelic Chorus. For 3 and 2 white, we get an enchantment that states whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain life equal to its toughness. And now this is the perfect card to keep our life total very healthy, while also synergizing very well with Baitor and other life gain synergy cards from our deck. But what cards do you think would go good with this Felithar Precon? From our playtesting, we had a lot of fun and actually were able to deal lots of damage early on, and we're very interested on how you guys have experienced this Precon as well. We're now 3 out of the 5 done for our Tarquir Precon video series, so stay tuned for more, and until next time, have a good one.